Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Hey, Pete.
Hey, Gunkelman, Dr. Marie Swingle. She broke out for a quick update. What's going on, Dr. Marie?
Yeah, good morning, hello, and I guess apologies. I'm not going to stay long.
All right.
Mary, Rusty, and Ron are presenting. It's all the beautiful raw EEG stuff, and there's always something new, so I don't want to miss out. But I'll just do a big shout out as, you know, this is what we're all about, meeting the raw EEG, and I wanted to come say hello.
Where are you?
I'm at AAPB in Denver.
Ah, okay. All right.
Yeah. So.
And what's the attendance like? Clue us in. What is AAPB? Then we'll let you go.
Oh, okay. Well, applied physiology and biofeedback. It's one of the, I would say, 3 organizations in our field that are doing wonderful things in terms of promoting what we do and teaching and sharing the research and what becomes the literature. So there's the AAPB, there's ISNR, and there's BFE, and of course Jay's Sioux Sun City Summit now. But yeah, this is where we all congregate and share what we're up to and advance the science and the practice.
Would you tell everybody hello from Pete?
Okay. And Jay, you know, it's
Yes.
ending at the beginning, and everybody mentioned their connection with you, which was just so sweet. So, yeah.
Thanks for popping in, Dr. Marie.
Okay. Take care, fellas.
All right.
We're, I think, going to veer off of the normal neuroscience track.
We're going to talk environment?
Environment.
Okay.
My avocation. My vocation is neuroscience, but my avocation is the environment. And I go back quite a long ways, and was called an EIR, that's an environmental impact report, hitman, by the Bay Area chapter of the Sierra Club. They would have a project that they would want to have evaluated as to what the impacts would be, and the EIRs, draft EIRs, come out, and you know there's a stack of paper that big, and you've got to be able to digest all of that to understand exactly what the project is, and after you've done a few of them, you kind of know where to look, and the most likely spot is computer modeling. And there's assumptions that you can put into the computer model that change how it models things. And with a little tweak, you can end up making a big difference in how dirty your plant looks. The first time I caught this was in Redwood City, California, where there was a garbage burning plant proposed. And you can't burn garbage without a problem. You know, I mean, anybody would know that. And, you know, you put scrubbers on and, you know, bag houses and all of that. But there's expected up the stack, particulates. Yeah. And what goes up does come down. We have to agree on the basic science of that. And in the computer modeling for dispersion modeling, you model the stuff that goes up the stack and where it goes. And, you know, wind and wind direction and all of that can be taken into account. But you put in some assumptions. If you put in a buoyancy factor, a reflection coefficient, the size of the particle that you can float increases. And the regulators look at, you know, 2.5 microns. That's a very small particle, and they regulate at that size. But if you float everything at 2 on down, you've just taken 99% of all of the heavy metal toxicity out of the deposition model. 1 micron sized particles get 99% of all the heavy metal toxicity, mercury, all sorts of very bad stuff adsorbs to the surface of very small particles in an inverse relationship. The smaller the particle, the more it gets coated. And if you float small particles that have 99% of your toxicity, your model is going to look pretty clean. And, the deposition model results go into the health model that you end up predicting how you're going to impact health. So if you clean up your deposition, the particles you disperse, and you have 99% less toxicity, you're going to look pretty clean. And all I did is raise my hand in the middle of a discussion and ask for the scientific support for the ability to float a 2-micron particle. To the best of my knowledge, Brownian motion kind of makes super small particles act like a gas because they get bounced around. They're so small. But that's 0.2 microns, not 2 microns. 2 microns comes down not quite like a bowling ball, but it comes down. So they would have to actually provide the scientific validity for the reflection coefficient that they put into their model. And the air quality management district engineers kind of looked puzzled, like, what? They had no clue what was the wool was being pulled over their eyes by the computer modeling people. And I caught them. They had to redo the model, and suddenly the model made the plant look dirty like a garbage burning plant would be, and they couldn't build it at that point. Redwood City, for goodness sakes, has population there, and there were enough people that you could get riled up about the results once you showed the results that they backed away with the proposal. I caught them a couple other times with the same sort of stuff. The most recent was a cement grinding plant in Vallejo. They were going to grind toxic waste brought in from Asia and turn it into Portland cement. And if you know Portland cement, for goodness sakes, don't stick your hands in that stuff. You expect an alkaline burn. It's useful for cement, but the dust from it is extremely hazardous. It's highly alkaline, and they were proposing this plant less than a quarter of a mile away from a grade school. I mean, then they pulled the same stuff, floating particles that couldn't float, and I caught them with it, and their EIR, the state attorney general sent an EIR specialist after my public statement about their bad EIR. They brought in a specialist, and they basically sent a letter to the city saying you can't make a decision based on the document that you've got in front of you. The document's a fraudulent document. So anyway, I've done that sort of thing, but the thing is, environment impacts health in a wildly underestimated way. Environmental things. The Midwest has radon gas that accumulates in basements, and that is a trigger for lung cancer, amongst others. Other cancers as well, but lung most likely. And who knows that? you know, uh, you know, the people knock on the door and
Yeah.
ask you, so how's the radon in the basement today? It's it's a hidden chronic toxicity. There are, Love Canal. Everybody knows they buried, really nasty stuff, covered it over, built homes in the area, and it oozed through the basement walls. And it was a disaster. They had to buy all the homes and stuff. So everybody thinks, oh, well, those are rare. They're not so rare. There are a lot of homes that have been built on top of what used to be a landfill, and they've bulldozed it flat and recontoured the hills and built a subdivision on top of it. Benicia, California, has a big subdivision that's built on top of an old dump, and they do what they can to remediate it, but quite honestly. Capping those things is not a permanent seal. And in some of the subdivisions in the CCNRs, which nobody freaking reads, it says you can't plant a tree in your yard because it could potentially penetrate about 3 feet below the surface, a lime barrier, trying to keep stuff out of stuff below that and release some of the toxicity. So, you're not allowed to plant things that have deep roots, a taproot that would bury through, and that includes Hercules, California. There's big subdivisions there built on top of really nasty. It's the dynamite city because that's where they made dynamite. And let's see, nitrogen compounds in the soil. So there's hidden but not hidden. People approve the building on top of stuff that you may consider maybe not such a great place to build because there's a huge demand for spots to build. And these are rolling subdivisions that bulldozed hills and filled valleys and recontoured things for a subdivision. So in Richmond, California, there's a proposal on top of a AstraZeneca site that has pyrite buried deep, and it releases TCE. Now, TCE, oh, a benign sounding acronym. What the freak is it? It's a solvent, and it's toxic as can be to the nervous system, and it's known to correlate with Parkinson's disease. Well, you don't want to be, and they've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homes proposed in multiple story buildings. Their initial plans said there wouldn't be dwellings on the ground floor because of the toxicity immediately underneath the parking lot, but now they've changed that. They seal now. Rising groundwater is happening because sea level rise brings sea level goes underneath groundwater, and as sea level rise happens, groundwater rise happens. And if you've got these things buried and capped, and suddenly the groundwater rises up into the toxicity, it doesn't stay underneath the cap. You get lateral distribution and flow, and the AstraZeneca site really should never be built on. And there's a big fight going on over that. But ultimately, I think that they've finally gotten enough of a high profile. And, AstraZeneca can afford to not build on that lot. It's a brown field lot. You can't really do anything on it. It's just too toxic.
Jay, with
Anyway,
all this stuff that's out there on the environment, it comes up like artificial turf, forever plastics, that always comes up. You know, insert whatever
Yeah.
event, or you're trying to get tax dollars, you're trying to get money, you're trying to stop money from being spent, you're going to come up with your marketing. With all the stuff going on in the environment, what do you think are the top couple things we got to pay attention to, especially on mental health wise? You brought up TCE. Anything else in the environment, or it depends where you live?
Well, it does depend where you live. There are areas that are much more toxic with air pollution because of roadways and local industries. Half a mile away, the air quality is dramatically different. And that's only now starting to be kind of plotted out. The air quality management districts monitoring historically has been, well, how shall I say, awful. That's giving it I had
Yes.
a lot of worse words I would have preferred using, but this is a family show, uh, so um, but there are now monitors that people have developed. The initial air quality monitoring done by the public was invented in the town of Crockett, California, uh, after a toxic release of 250 something tons of an alkaline catalyst from a refinery that dumped on the town that I lived in. Now, it saved my life because we found my brain tumor by accident because of my response to the alkaline burn not going away. But just because it saved my life doesn't mean it didn't make hundreds and hundreds of people really sick.
Yeah.
Little tiny town of 3,000 something people, about 350 or so were really quite ill from it. We set up a local clinic to address that, and there was a large agreed settlement, not a litigation, but a settlement, and they agreed to the clinic, and they basically ended up agreeing to a good neighbor agreement. I went personally to their land use hearing. You got to have a land use permit to operate an industry, and it's a routine thing. They renew your land use permit, and nobody's going to stop the refinery from refining. They pay taxes, and the county is going to take money from them, so they want them to operate. So I went into the hearing as a young, this is 35 years ago now. So, a much younger, still full of piss and vinegar. But I went into the hearing and raised my hand for the public comment you get when an item is on the agenda. And so I stand up and I said, I'm not trying to stop the refinery from getting their land use permit renewed. But I'd like you to hold this hearing in abeyance until they come back with a good neighbor agreement on how they're going to behave, because they just dump toxic waste on the town. And the refinery management grumbled that there's no such thing as a good neighbor agreement. You can't hold us to that standard. And Commissioner Clark, who's sitting up on the dais high above, is looking at his watch. His eyes are rolling. He's not getting this. He just wants to give them their damn permit and get this hearing over. And here I am, an upstart that's just thrown this monkey wrench into their smooth permit. And so he says, well, what is a good neighbor agreement? Now, I realize I'm going down in flames, so I got nothing to lose. So I said, well, a good neighbor agreement is, and I looked at the refinery, if you don't throw your garbage over the fence into our yard, I won't shoot your dog. Now, eyes got big. The whole place came silent, and everybody was just shocked. And the refinery management said out loud to the commissioner, "You don't have the right to hold up our permit." Uh-oh. I was going down in flames, but I just got saved because the refinery management just said, "You don't have the right to a regulator." Commissioner Clark's nostrils flared, his pupils got big, down came the gavel, and he says, "These hearings are held in abeyance until you come back with a good neighbor agreement." There is no such thing. The town is an unincorporated township. There's nobody there officially to negotiate with. The refinery's lawyers and everybody were bumping into each other like a Keystone Cop flick, and suddenly they came over to me and said, "Well, it's an unincorporated township. There's nobody to negotiate with." I said, "Well, negotiate with me." And so they kind of hummed and hawed and said, "Well," the refinery manager said, "Well, in 2 weeks, come into the refinery." And I said, "Well, I'll find somebody from Rodeo, the other town on the other side, and we'll come in 2 weeks." So I went home, thinking that, I was lucky to get out of the hearing alive, much less with their land use permit held up. And I got home. Pretty soon, the rumor mill in the little tiny town of 3,000 gets rolling. I got called, and they said, "Come on down. We're having a meeting down at the community center." So I went to the community center, and here there's a whole bunch of people sitting around a table already, and they all look at me, and one of them says, "Are you negotiating with the refinery on our behalf?" And I said, "Well, I'm meeting with them in a couple of weeks." And they said, "What gives you the right?" And I said, "Well, nothing. Why don't you do it?" And I turned and left. They formed the committee, and immediately they realized none of them really play poker at that level, so they asked me to be the negotiator for them, and we negotiated a good neighbor agreement with a different refinery manager. The refinery manager who stood up and said, "You don't have the right," ended up getting a different job. Uh, they pulled him and sent in a really smooth guy from LA to do the negotiations, and it went very, very well. And in the middle of all that negotiation, we discovered my brain tumor, and within 2 weeks, I had to have the surgery to remove the tumor to save my life. And so I actually negotiated the settlement, which included the good neighbor agreement that had a fence line monitoring system, because they dumped toxic waste and didn't tell anybody. I wanted to have something on the fence line that would detect what they were releasing, whether they wanted us to know it or not. Now, Crockett developed the buckets first, the bucket brigade that went all over the world. That these 5-gallon buckets with a Kevlar bag with a little pump on the top with a battery and a switch. You take it to where the stink is, flip the switch, it sucks the bag full. You flip the switch off, document the time and place, and you've got a laboratory quality sample to document what's been caught. We call it catching the stink, and it's a useful tool that's been used in Louisiana and all over the world, Africa. It's a very popular $50 air monitor for the community, and that was funded originally by the law firm Masri and Vidito, which is the law firm for I'm blocking on her name, Erin Brockovich. As a law firm, they were kind of predatory, but they did help on that. But they descended on the town after the release, and we found a class action attorney to represent the town to negotiate a settlement. But that it didn't go to court, but they set up a legal panel to review individual cases, and it was funded for about $300 million. So it was a big settlement. But the fence line monitoring ended up, I go under surgery, I pop back, and we've got the good neighbor agreement that says we're going to design this fence line monitoring system. And it turns out the refinery thought they were going to build a little shed on the side of the refinery with a pump that would suck through a hole on the wall and run it through a gas analyzer and tell them what hit that hole. Well, it could have gone over there. Why would it hit this hole and not go over there? How many of these little holes are you going to have around the fence line all the way around your property? And my idea was lasers. You can shoot, and these were big lasers, not like a pen light laser, and they're going to end up shooting a kilometer-long beam, and what I had in mind was not necessarily what they had in mind. So let me.
Bucket's not good enough for you, Jay.
This is one of the lasers. That's a big honking laser, isn't it? This is an upgrade to one that was even a little bit bigger, but this is the original one had a had a rotating disc that had slits in it to end up cutting the sample into discrete bits. So it was an electromechanical thing, and if you got something that's mechanical instead of something that's solid state, it's going to break down. Anyway, this is an upgraded system. We've got these lasers shot into gold retroreflectors a kilometer away. There are 64 gold retroreflectors. Now, these were replaced. If you notice carefully, there's a thumbprint on this sucker. When they installed it, what did you have for lunch? Well, a ham sandwich. Yeah, I'm going to put these things in now. And the degradation of the gold retroreflector was such that they had to replace them because the signal coming back was attenuated. And it wasn't the only kind of laser. We had a smaller. This is the UV laser, not the FTI. FTIR is Fourier transform infrared. Fourier transform. Doesn't that sound suspiciously like EEG stuff? Fourier transform gives you a spectra. This is the absorbance spectra of methane. Now you shoot a beam and there's stuff in the beam it's going to absorb. Kind of like sticking your hand up in the thing and making a funny, fox or a rabbit or something. There's everything that's in the beam is going to give you a different set of prints. And if you've got this one, you can compare what you're doing now, what you see right now in the beam, with a library, like a database, a Fourier of peaks with a database. Does that sound familiar? This is it just makes so damn much sense to this old EEG tech that this technology is the technology we need, not a little hole sucking air in a fence. We want a kilometer-long beam that's going to catch whatever breaks the beam. Now, the data ends up giving us a spectra that ends up having to be processed. You've shot a beam when it was clean air. That's your reference spectra. And if you've got a spectra now that's different from it, you subtract your clean air spectra from the current spectra. The peaks that stick up that are giving you the finger are the ones that you need to figure out what they are. And we've got a library of shit that we're actually tracking real time. Well, what's real time? Well, there's an averaging that has to happen. You know, you're shooting a beam, it's coming. You're shooting a beam, it's coming back along the original path and going through a supercooled interferometer and giving us a spectra. So this is kind of high-techy. You know, this isn't what the air quality management district was thinking. They think in terms of chemistry. This is physics. And the air district thinks when we get this system finally built, there was an argument in front of the land use permit group as to whose design, and they basically said, do what the community wants. And they were so embarrassed because of the 256 tons that they didn't tell anybody about for 16 days that they had to basically build the system for us. It was the first one ever done. It included infrared and ultraviolet lasers. The air district basically thought we were nuts. What are you using physics to detect chemistry for? They're all chemists, you know? And so this absorbance spectra stuff did not make any sense to them. 20 years later, the air district holds advisory panel inviting in all the universities experts, the air districts brought in experts. They invited me and Denny Larson. Denny's passed, unfortunately, and they were advised on what's the best monitoring for refineries. And in 2018, the Air Quality Management District decided that what we did over 20 years before was the best technology. So this ended up working out. Now, the whole story behind this is actually detailed in something that was written up by Drexel University, Citizen Engineers on the Fence Line, because none of the regulators would have had this done. None. And we did it 20 years before, and we know how it operates and how to run it. Now, the management districts are not managing the ones that they mandated very well. You know, you don't have to have a really, really clean air beam for your reference. You can shoot a kind of a dirty one and now cover up stuff in the beam. The operator can operate it badly, and some of them are. And, you know, we're trying to get that straightened out now, but, you know, the air district is, although they're more friendly to the public now than they had been historically, they're still kind of tightly intertwined with the people that they regulate, unfortunately.
And we have a link to the article that everybody can check out, right?
Yeah, it's a long read. My apologies. You know, get yourself an extra soda and, you know, maybe a sports energy drink to make it through to the end or something. But it's a long story. I mentioned in it, obviously, there's a lot of others that are as well. And it tells the story of the release and the fence line system and this meeting 20-something years later, and the final regulations that ended up being mandated first by the Air Quality Management District in the Bay Area, and then by the California air regulators it's mandated for the whole state. So what we put in public domain, so you couldn't patent it because it's my avocation, not my vocation, it ends up being used now all over. It's in Japan. It's in Houston, outside Houston, in the Ship Channel, monitoring Texas cities effluent going towards Houston. They want to quantify how badly they're being dumped on by the refinery that's upwind from them. So, and monitoring refineries is great, but there's monitoring for other things too. You know, the infrared monitoring can be done with lasers, but it can also be done with a video camera that sees infrared. And I don't know if you remember a leak in California, a well that leaked called in Porter Ranch. And you can look this up, Porter Ranch, California. And it was a methane leak. And people in the community were getting ill, and the air district said, oh, well, they're going to plug it. And they said, oh, we plugged it. And the air district said it's plugged. And people said, well, we're still being sick. And they ended up setting up a laser system, an infrared laser, downwind from the release spot, and started to track hits that they were getting. And when you have data, the regulators can't deny the problem. Unless you have data, they can give you the flim-flam, we're handling it, or there's diluted, there's no problem. I mean, but when you have data, you've got data. And there were thousands of people that signed up to track online this infrared beam data like this. So, the exact amount, the wind direction, wind speed, temperature, a little bit of Met station data as well. So that is coming from that site onto the laser, as opposed to something coming from the other direction, for instance. Now, in the refinery, if you have them from the upwind and downwind, you can subtract one from the other and figure out how much they're releasing as a mass loading over time. We did that and went to the management of the refinery, who at that point knew me fairly well. And I was on their community advisory panel and had done audits of the refinery for safety and fire and all sorts of stuff. So, I know more about the damn refinery than anyone should have to know. And I wish I didn't have to know. But I went into, asked if I could come in, had some stuff to show him. The refinery management said, oh, yeah, Tuesday at noon, come on in, we'll have lunch. So I sat in his office, and we had sandwiches brought in, and I had a computer printout, and it showed how much they added from upwind to downwind over a period of time. And, there were no violations. It's not like what they had done wasn't within their operating permit. But I said, this is a lot of tonnage that's been released. And this is fugitive releases that are, they just escape from flanges and valves, and valves are known to leak, so they go around periodically and measure, and if they're over a certain level, then they have to flange it off and replace the valve. But these are packing valves. Remember the old homes? You'd end up with a faucet that dripped, and you'd take it apart and put a new rubber on the end and screw it back down and stop the leak for a while, until you screwed it too many times and it got flattened off and it wouldn't seal anymore. Those are packing valves. That's what the refineries use. It's industry standard. That's what they all use. And I suggested that if they replaced all the valves in the refinery, and I know how many they have, anything over 2 inches with a bellows valve, this is the washerless faucet you have at home, only an industrial version. That would reduce by many, many tons. We estimated about 500 tons less emission. Now, again, all within regulation. No regulator could come in and say, you have to replace these valves. I asked him to replace the valves, and he looked at me quizzically and said, we're in compliance with everything. Do you know how much this would cost? And I said, yeah, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $10 million. And he said, yeah, that's probably about right. Well, I know how many valves. He knows how many valves, and so he said no, and kind of get out. And I said, okay, I'll get out, but let me tell you where I'm going to go with this data. Leaf, Cabraser, Hyman, and Bernstein in San Francisco is a class action law firm. We can take this data, punch it into a dispersion model showing where this pollution is going to go over time. And we're going to create a downstream health impact model. And we're going to create a class action litigation against you. And I'm going to tie up you and your management and your refineries operators for a decade in litigation. Or you can replace these valves and continue to operate your refinery and not screw around in a waste of time and money in court, because you're going to spend that 10 million fighting the court. They stretch it out. It'll be a decade. And Leaf, Cabraser, Hyman, and Bernstein is big enough to do this to you. So they just did it, with the 256 tons. So he said, well, tell you what, leave the printout here, and I'll talk to our lawyers about it, and we'll contact you in a couple of weeks. I got a call the next day from a lawyer, and his basic question, kind of hunting around, his basic question was, do you really know somebody at Leaf, Cabraser, Hyman, and Bernstein? And I told him, I know what you're asking here indirectly. And yes, I know somebody there above the line. And in a law firm, there's a line, partners are above it and various associates are below it. But the person I know was above the line. So a decision maker, not some peon, a rookie. And and he says, really? And I said, well, don't do the fix and find out. Essentially,
Call your bluff.
fuck around and find out.
Yeah.
And that was the end of the conversation. I got a call from the manager to come in, and I went in, and he sat down and he said, what if I replaced them on a replacement schedule? So when a valve would go bad and I'd have to flange it off and replace the washer, I flange it off and put in a new valve. And this will take 4 or 5 years. Yeah. And I said, okay, that's reasonable. Now, this is high level bluffing poker, because I don't know for sure that Leaf, Cabraser, Hyman, and Bernstein would have taken it on, because it's a bit of a long shot. But it was a possible, probable, and that uncertainty isn't very good in business. And the certainty of, I got to replace a valve anyway, let's just do this and not fuck around and find out. So
risk.
And anyway, my apologies for the family show deviations. You can bleep
Dr. Marie's
those.
not here, Jay. We can do whatever we
Yeah.
want.
But
Uh,
that's the kind of environmental stuff I've done. I've done wind farms. There was a reservoir that was going to be filled that had petroglyph Indian caves next to it, and the recreation would basically put people in contact with the petroglyphs, so they had to be sealed off. And so there's I've been involved in a whole bunch of stuff. Chevron's deepwater outfall. Chevron wanted to take their outfall and move it from Castro Cove, which they were toxifying so bad it was awful. They wanted to move it out further into the bay so there was more water flow.
mm.
The solution to pollution is not dilution. Now, you can't just spread it around farther, faster, and make it better. And I did a one-page comment, and in that one-page comment, I suggested, before they dump the water out into the bay through their outfall, they have to test whether the fish will last 100 hours. They're using stickleback minnows. You have to step on a stickleback minnow to kill the damn things. They live in crappy circumstances. Put trout in there and see if you can keep them alive for 100 hours. And now you've got something that's testing the water quality. And the water board changed the standard. They couldn't use stickleback minnows anymore. They had to use trout, and they had to clean up their effluent a lot before they could end up just dumping it out. And they didn't get to move it out further. They had to clean up the dumping. So it cost them a small fortune to do that. It was a lot of, I've had estimates that I've cost industry way, way, way more than it would have cost them to hire Hitman. So anyway.
Jay Gunkelman, you never surprise me, my friend. Don't get on the wrong side of history with you.
I was already kind of trained for the negotiation with the refinery because the town of Crockett had gone through an environmental issue. The sugar refinery, Crockett has a sugar refinery, C&H Sugar, and it's been there forever, 1905, 1906, something like that. And it's a unique part of town, and more than half the town worked there. It was a company town. They had a lot of stuff that they did for the town historically, but that was coming to an end. But they wanted to put in a cogeneration power plant to produce electricity for the grid and steam for the refinery to heat up sugar, boil the sugar, and refine it. And it's a great idea, cogeneration. Hey, but it's how you build it and where you build it that really matters. And they were going to put it across the street from Victorian homes that had a view of the water. And there was going to be a 20-foot tall corrugated metal, sheet wall, and that was 2 blocks from a home I had that had a view of the water going by, and their steam plumes from their cooling towers would have obstructed the view of the town. So, when we heard that they were planning on doing this, we intervened. Now, California Energy Commission is designed to take away from local regulatory control power plants and things so that they want to have built because local people might resist it locally. And so it's done at the state level. And previously, only one person had ever filed as an intervener in a filing, a submission for them to consider. Well, Crockett had 100 people file for intervener status. And we had read their underlying law that allowed them to exist and was their how they operated. And we also filed for pauper status. So I was declared a pauper by the state of California, so that we only had to submit one copy, and they would copy it and distribute it. And there can be hundreds of copies, and that would be very expensive. So and the administrative judge said, well, that this is unheard of. We'd only ever had one, and you come in with 100. I want you to consolidate, and we'll give you 10. So we consolidated to 10, and I was one of the 10, and I got my pauper status. And but we stopped the power plant from being built. They had to withdraw their permit. The permit in the state has a 1-year statutory guarantee that you'll get your decision at the end of 1 year. That's the process. You'll get a decision to expedite. Well, by the time they were coming to the end of the 1 year, first of all, we went into when their submission was about to be accepted, and up goes the hand. You can't accept their submission at this meeting because they didn't submit the cover page that says they're submitting it under penalty of perjury, true and accurate under penalty of perjury. There's no cover letter, and it's thou shall have a cover letter in the law that underlies your regulatory agency. And they said they huddled with their their lawyers real quick and asked, and the lawyer said, "Yep, that's what it says, thou shalt." They said, "Yep." So all of the other ones who are back behind them are quickly writing a cover letter under penalty of perjury and submitting theirs. The power plant in Crockett Cogen was the name of it, and it's a famous circumstance at this point. People that study power plant design and stuff study Crockett Cogen, and they withdrew their permit 3 times. The 3rd time it was submitted, after that, I did a Dun & Bradstreet every time on who was in the group that does a submission. And suddenly the general partner was Pacific Generation, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Pacific Corp. Pacific Corp, a $10 billion a year profit company. And I realize we are about to get stomped. And we're going to get stomped bad because they're going to grease the wheels of permit like they've never been greased before. And so they asked to meet with me, and the head of Pacific Generation, Mr. Miller, sat down with me, and he said, "Well, what's the problem?" And well, I don't want it across the street from the Victorians. I want you to move it over here in a smaller area. I don't want any wet cooling towers. I want you to have the world's largest dry cooling system, an air conditioner for the plant with no steam plume. The ammonia tank that you've got next to the train track, I want that put underground and switch from anhydrous to aqueous ammonia. There's you right now you've got 4 shafts with 2 steam turbines and 2 gas turbines, all spinning generators. I want you to put it on one shaft with a giant GE Frame 7E, 1 steam, 1 gas, 1 steam, and 1 generator on one shaft, reducing the friction, but shrinking the size of the plant so you can put it into the little quarter-acre area behind these existent industrial bins. And he basically, and there was other things too there that, you know, I wanted to use selective catalytic reduction for their smokestack to cut down on nitrogen oxides. I mean, there's a lot of technical shit too, but you know, he finally said, "Okay, I'm going to send a bunch of engineers up. We're going to sit down with you, and we're going to sketch out exactly what is going to be agreeable." And I came to an agreement with them with what I would end up not opposing. I would support, because cogen's a good idea. And if you put it in the right spot and you can't see it or smell it, and it's not making a dirty smokestack, it's a good idea. So for 8.5 years, we stopped something that was guaranteed 1 year of statutory hearing. And then for 1.5 years, negotiated the settlement that allowed them to build it. And we got a payment to the town of Crockett, 3,000 people, over 30 years, a $30 million payment. When they came to town before the 10 years that we stopped them over, the public hearing officer said, you know, this is going to happen within 1.5 years or more from now. They're going to start building this. If you're lucky, you'll get like $150,000, $200,000 to maybe do some little thing here in town. $30 million. Now, when they set it up, we set it up as a foundation. This is a community foundation, and it's there to manage the funds that are coming in, and that the Crockett Community Foundation ends up being, they recommended against it as being an elected board of directors. They said nobody does an elected board of directors on a charitable foundation. So we said, well, that's how it's going to have to be, because nobody in town is going to put up with a clique of people self-appointing the next people. They're going to want to vote. So the League of Women Voters comes in every 2 years, and if you can show you live in town, you don't have to be a registered voter for any party or anything like that. If you live in town, you get to vote. And you vote in the people that are going to end up controlling the money. We structured it at the start so 1/3 of the money coming in went into an endowment, because at the end of 30 years, the town is going to be accustomed to spending money. And if you suddenly cut off the money flow, that's awfully sudden. You're used to being a bunch of drunken sailors spending money. You've got to still have a something to spend down on. So we said 1/3 of the money went into an endowment, and at 5% drawdown, which is easily done at the end of the 30 years, which is coming up fairly soon, actually, they're going to draw down money and continue to spend on the swim team and the community center and the bocce club, and they've beautified the town. There was chain link fence that was replaced with nicely done welded ornamental fencing. They've totally rebuilt a classic craftsman community center. Beautiful rebuild. To period. I mean, beautiful job. Anyway, the town blossomed from it. Now, historically, the same amount of money tossed into people's pockets as a settlement wouldn't really get the same kind of an outcome. When you pool the money and have conscious awareness of how you're spending it, it's more efficient. You get more bang for your buck. And if you're really wise, you use your money to leverage grants. So they were well advised. So anyway, Crockett's a unique little community.
That's Gunkelman's town.
No, I moved out. We're in Sassoon City at this point.
But that's your town. You go to Crockett, they say that's Gunkelman's town. We all know Suisun City's your town, but what town isn't your town, Jay?
Well, I just don't know when I shouldn't stick my nose into somebody else's business, But if you dump toxic waste on the town and half my neighbors are ill, it's time to sit down and come up to a good neighbor agreement so we don't have to shoot your dog.
Oh, God. Jay Gunkelman, thank you. Have a great weekend, my friend.
You too.
Over now.
The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.